A piece of history has been unearthed. The latest from Podnews.net with Climavores, the podcast for healthy food and a healthy planet. In January 2001, Adam Curry wrote a blog post discussing how an always-on connection could download entertainment to, quote, have the show ready for me when I am. It was the blog posts that turned into a meeting with Dave Weiner, which turned into podcasting. But it's been lost for years until now. You can read The Last Yard, the blog post that started it all, in a link in our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net. And hear the early days of podcasting in a special documentary just added to the Podnews Extra podcast. You'll find that wherever you get your podcasts, and it includes this, a clip from the first ever podcast with Christopher Lydon.
Dave Weiner, I feel like a new immigrant in this blogger world where you're a kind of founding father. Walk me around it.
In other news, podcast host Disctopia and Albi have added integration with value-for-value payments. The tool enables a pay-what-you-want system to allow people to reward the podcasters they listen to. Transistor can now automatically add chapter timestamps into episode notes. Plink is running a 50% discount for their Pro plan for smart podcast links. Their special pricing ends tomorrow. In Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, the second annual Podfest took place at the Dubai Press Club. The club has launched an Arab podcasters program to grow podcasters in the region. We link to a news release covering what was said, including the mention of Podcasting 2.0. And the Jerusalem Post has covered English language podcasters from Israel. It's a Monday, so time for some tech stuff. Here's a fun fact for you. Art19's RSS feed for the Tim Ferriss Show is 22 megabytes large. It contains 640 shows. There's a new release of Podping Cloud, the hosted front end to the Podping notification system. That's being tested at the moment. And last week, Samsung Free's new autoplay feature, which kicks in as soon as a user hits the Listen tab in the app, meant significant extra traffic for podcasts. The audio user agent contains not just Dalvik, but also later in the string an identifier of the Samsung mobile model being used. Now, Dalvik is standard code used within Android, much like Apple Core Media has been for Apple, and some podcast hosting platforms have blocked the Dalvik user agent entirely. But doing that is probably not a good idea. Even with those Samsung model numbers, it'll also block, among other things, Google News' audio player, at least one app powered by Podcast Index, along with Podcast Addict and Indian podcast app Ghana. There's more details in our show notes and our newsletter today at podnews.net. And in podcast news,
the Rhodesian nationalist leader, Bishop Abel Muzorewa, has...
You're settling down to your TV dinner and watching the news on the telly.
But, he says, there are conditions.
And all of a sudden, the picture wobbles, and a strange alien voice, calling himself Vrilon, starts giving orders to live in peace or leave the galaxy.
This is the voice of Allah, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Kamala, speaking to you.
Now, this really happened 45 years ago this week in the south of England. The Interruption looks at the mysterious voice and what it could have been. It's new today from Stack. The Confidence Chronicles has been named Podcast of the Year at the Raw Success Awards in Brisbane in Australia. It's the second award it's won in the last 2 months, as it was also named Podcast of the Year at the Oz Mumpreneur Awards. And Tortoise Media and Podimo have launched a multi-show partnership. Their first show, a weekly, is called The News Meeting. This podcast is sponsored by Climavores. Climavores is a podcast for eaters who are trying to navigate the complex relationship between healthy food and a healthy planet. Hosted by journalists Tamar Haspel and Mike Grunwald, they explore the complicated, confusing and surprising relationship between food and the environment. From Postscript Media, listen to Climavores wherever you get your podcasts. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.